Billionaire vanished for years, until a Christmas return shattered him when he saw his ex with twins welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. The December air cut through Lucas Everhart's tailored wool coat as he stood outside the familiar brownstone, its windows glowing with warm Christmas lights. 5 years. 5 years since he'd walked these streets, breathed this air, allowed himself to remember what home felt like. At 44, Lucas had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Everhart infrastructure had become synonymous with impossible projects. Bridges that defied engineering logic, tunnels that connected worlds, contracts that other companies wouldn't dare touch. His name appeared in Forbes. His face graced the covers of business magazines, and his bank account held numbers that most people couldn't pronounce. Yet here he stood, hesitating like a schoolboy afraid of detention. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks ago, hand-delivered to his Manhattan penthouse by a courier who refused to leave until Lucas signed for it personally. The cream-colored cardstock bore familiar handwriting. Christmas Eve gathering. Like the old days. Don't even think about saying no. David Hayes. His college roommate, his best man, his conscience when Lucas had none left. The man who'd stopped calling after Lucas disappeared without explanation, without goodbye, without the courtesy of a text message to say he was leaving everything behind. Lucas pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over David's number. He could still back out, send an expensive bottle of wine with his apologies, claim urgent business in Dubai or Stockholm or any of the dozen cities where his presence was always needed, always demanded, always more important than whatever was happening here. But exhaustion had settled into his bones like winter cold, and for the first time in years the thought of another boardroom, another handshake, another deal worth millions felt like dying slowly. He rang the doorbell. Lucas, David's wife, Jennifer, opened the door with wide eyes, as if she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Wow, you actually came. Should I not have? Lucas managed to smile, the kind that had charmed investors and closed impossible deals. The invitation seemed pretty insistent. Jennifer's shock melted into genuine warmth. No, come in, please. David will be thrilled. We all wondered if you'd... She trailed off diplomatically. If I'd grown a conscience? Lucas stepped inside, immediately hit by the scent of cinnamon and pine, the sound of children's laughter from the living room, the kind of chaos that came with family gatherings. Jury's still out on that. The house buzzed with familiar energy. Lucas recognized faces from college, from early career days, from the time when his biggest concern was whether he could afford decent wine for dinner parties in his studio apartment. Now he could buy this entire neighborhood without checking his bank balance, but he felt more out of place than he ever had sleeping on couches and eating ramen. Lucas Everhart, you magnificent bastard, David's voice boomed across the room, and suddenly Lucas was engulfed in a bear hug that lasted 3 seconds too long. I can't believe you're here. I sent the invitation, but I honestly thought you'd send some assistant with a fruit basket. I don't have an assistant, Lucas said, then corrected himself. I have 7 assistants, but none of them handle my personal life. Do you have a personal life? David's question carried no judgment, just genuine curiosity. Before Lucas could answer, the front door opened again, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the musical sound of a woman's voice saying, "Boys, remember what we talked about. Inside, voices, gentle hands, and no running in the house." Lucas turned toward the sound and time stopped. Avery Collins, no, she'd gone back to her maiden name after the divorce, stood in the doorway, unwrapping a red wool scarf from around her neck. Her honey blonde hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, longer than he remembered, with subtle highlights that caught the light. She wore a cream sweater that complemented her fair complexion and dark jeans that showed she'd maintained the runner's figure he'd once known by heart. But it wasn't Avery who made Lucas's chest tighten until he couldn't breathe. It was the 2 small boys standing on either side of her, each holding one of her hands. They were identical in every way that mattered. The same dark brown hair that cowlicked exactly like Lucas's had at that age. The same storm gray eyes that stared out from the covers of business magazines. The same stubborn set to their jaws that Lucas recognized from his own mirror. They couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old, and they were unmistakably, undeniably, devastatingly his. "Mama, you said we could have cookies," one of them said, tugging on Avery's hand. "After dinner, Ethan," she replied, her voice steady, warm. "You know the rules." "Miles gets to have juice," the other boy, Ethan, protested. Miles asked politely, Avery said, beginning to remove their coats with practiced efficiency. "What do we say when we want something?" "Please, Mama." "May I have juice, too?" Ethan's request came out in the careful cadence of a child who'd been taught manners. "Much better. Yes, you may." Lucas stood frozen, watching this intimate choreography of motherhood, this glimpse into a life that had continued without him. Avery moved with the quiet confidence of a woman who'd learned to handle everything alone, and the boys responded to her with the easy affection of children who'd never known chaos, only stability. She looked up then, and saw him. For a moment neither of them moved. The laughter and conversation around them faded to white noise. 5 years collapsed into 5 seconds, and Lucas was 28 again, watching Avery walk down the aisle toward him in a simple white dress, believing they had forever. Then the moment shattered. "Lucas." Her voice carried no surprise, no anger, no warmth, just acknowledgement, as if he were an acquaintance she'd run into at the grocery store. "Avery." He couldn't manage anything more. She looked down at the boys who were staring at Lucas with the open curiosity of children who'd been raised to be polite to strangers. "Boys, this is Mama's friend Lucas. Can you say hello?" "Hello, Lucas," they said in unison, and the sound of their voices, so young, so innocent, so completely unaware that they were meeting their father for the first time, nearly brought Lucas to his knees. "Hello," he managed, crouching down to their eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. They had Avery's gentle mouth but his stubborn chin, her delicate bone structure but his broad shoulders already showing in their small frames. "Are you tall?" Miles asked, apparently fascinated by Lucas's height. "Very tall," Lucas confirmed, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Are you very smart?" Both boys nodded solemnly. "Mama says we're too smart for our own good," Ethan supplied helpfully. "Mama's usually right about these things," Lucas said, glancing up at Avery, who was watching this interaction with careful neutrality. "Come on, boys," she said gently. "Let's go find Aunt Jennifer and see if we can help with dinner." As she guided them away, Lucas caught her elbow gently. "Avery, could I talk to you? Later?" She studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. The man who'd chosen ambition over love? The husband who'd walked away from everything they'd built? The stranger who disappeared without explanation? "Okay," she said finally. Later, Lucas watched them walk away, the boys chattering about cookies and Christmas presents, Avery listening with the patient attention of a mother who genuinely enjoyed her children's company. He stood there long after they'd disappeared into the kitchen, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd just discovered. He had sons, 2 beautiful, intelligent, healthy sons who didn't know his name, didn't know his face, didn't know that half their DNA came from the man who'd spent 5 years building financial empires while missing every birthday, every first word, every bedtime story. "You okay, man?" David appeared at his elbow, following his gaze toward the kitchen. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Lucas turned to his oldest friend, the only person who'd known him before success changed everything. "David, those boys, Ethan and Miles," David supplied. "Great kids. Avery's done an incredible job with them." "How old are they?" 4.5, I think, maybe 5. "Why?" David's expression shifted from casual to concerned. "Lucas, what's going on?" But Lucas couldn't answer, couldn't explain that he was doing rapid mental math, counting backward from what appeared to be his sons' ages to a timeline that made perfect, terrible sense. Couldn't admit that he'd walked away from the best thing in his life and missed the creation of the 2 most important things he'd never known existed. Instead, he excused himself to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror, seeing his own eyes looking back at him from 2 small faces that would forever change everything he thought he knew about his life. How do you make up for 5 years of absence? How do you explain to children that their father chose money over family? And how do you ask the woman you abandoned for forgiveness when she's clearly built a beautiful life without you? The Christmas dinner passed like a fever dream for Lucas. He sat across the table from Avery and the boys, forcing conversation with old friends while every fiber of his being focused on the small family unit that had somehow formed without him. Ethan ate his mashed potatoes with surgical precision, separating each food group on his plate. Miles abandoned his fork entirely, using his fingers to build small sculptures from his green beans. Miles, utensils, Avery said quietly, not even looking up from cutting her own chicken. But Mama, I'm making dinosaurs, Miles protested, holding up a particularly artistic arrangement of vegetables. Dinosaurs can wait until after dinner. Fork, please. The gentle but firm correction, delivered with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times, made Lucas's chest ache. He'd missed this, all of this, the daily negotiations, the small battles, the quiet victories of parenthood. Mr. Lucas, Ethan said suddenly, fixing him with those familiar gray eyes. Do you have kids? The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. Around the table, conversation continued. David was telling a story about his latest camping disaster. Jennifer was laughing at something her sister said, but Lucas felt the world narrow to just him and this small boy who was asking the most complicated question imaginable. Lucas started, then stopped. He glanced at Avery, who had gone very still. That's a good question, Ethan. It's a yes or no question, Miles piped up helpfully. Mama says those are the easiest kind. You're absolutely right, Lucas said, unable to suppress a small smile. Mama sounds very wise. Avery's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and for just a moment her carefully composed mask slipped. Lucas caught a glimpse of something raw and unguarded. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of the man who used to make her laugh. So do you, Ethan persisted, apparently unsatisfied with philosophical discussions about question types. Not exactly, Lucas said carefully, but I hope to, someday. The answer seemed to satisfy Ethan, who returned to his methodical eating. Miles had already lost interest and was now attempting to balance his spoon on his nose. But Avery was watching Lucas with an expression he couldn't quite read. After dinner, the adults gathered in the living room while the children played in the adjoining den. Lucas found himself positioned where he could see through the doorway, watching Ethan help Miles build an elaborate fortress from couch cushions. They worked together with an easy cooperation that spoke of years of shared adventures, shared secrets, shared everything. They're incredible kids, David said, settling into the chair next to Lucas with a glass of wine. Avery's done something really special with them. She always was good with children, Lucas replied, remembering how Avery had volunteered at the children's hospital during their marriage, how she'd light up around kids in ways that should have told him everything he needed to know about what she wanted from life. She had to be, David said quietly. Raising twins alone isn't exactly easy. The words weren't accusatory, but they hit their target anyway. Lucas took a long sip of his whiskey, letting the burn distract him from the guilt that had been building all evening. David? Avery's voice came from behind them. Could I borrow Lucas for a few minutes? She stood in the doorway wearing that same neutral expression she'd worn all evening, but there was something in her posture, a slight tension in her shoulders, a careful distance in the way she held herself, that suggested this conversation had been inevitable from the moment he'd walked through the door. Of course, David said, glancing between them with obvious curiosity but enough discretion not to ask questions. Avery led Lucas to the small study off the main hallway, closing the door behind them. The room was quiet, insulated from the laughter and conversation outside. She didn't sit, instead choosing to lean against the desk with her arms crossed, creating both physical and emotional distance. So, she said, her voice carefully controlled. 5 years. 5 years, Lucas confirmed. He wanted to move closer, to bridge the space between them, but something in her stance warned him to stay put. No phone call, no letter, no explanation. You just vanished. Lucas had rehearsed this conversation in his head during countless sleepless nights in hotel rooms around the world. He'd imagined noble justifications, elegant explanations, words that would somehow make his abandonment seem reasonable. But standing here, facing the woman who'd once been his everything, all those carefully crafted speeches crumbled. I was a coward, he said simply. The honesty seemed to surprise her. Her arms loosened slightly, though she didn't uncross them. That's it? That's your explanation? What do you want me to say, Avery? That I had some grand plan? That I was protecting you somehow? That would be a lie. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. I was overwhelmed, terrified and selfish. When our marriage ended, I ran. It's not admirable, but it's the truth. You didn't just run from our marriage, Lucas. You ran from everything. From David, from your family, from this entire life. I know. Do you? Her voice sharpened, the first crack in her composure. Do you know that your mother cried every Christmas for 3 years, wondering if you were alive? Do you know that David hired a private investigator because he was convinced something terrible had happened to you? Each revelation hit Lucas like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own pain, his own inability to cope, that he'd barely considered the collateral damage of his disappearance. I didn't know, he admitted. I thought everyone would be better off without me. That's incredibly arrogant, Avery said, but her anger seemed more exhausted than furious. Deciding for everyone else what they needed. Deciding that we couldn't handle your problems, your struggles, your humanity. Lucas absorbed the criticism because it was true, because he deserved it, because she was finally talking to him like the woman who'd once known him better than anyone. You're right, he said. All of it. You're absolutely right. The admission seemed to deflate some of her anger. She studied his face for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw there. The boy she'd fallen in love with in college? The man she'd married full of hope and dreams? The stranger who'd walked away from everything they'd built? Why did you come back? She asked finally. Honestly, I don't know. David's invitation? Maybe. Exhaustion. The realization that I'd built everything I thought I wanted and none of it meant anything. He paused. I certainly didn't expect to see you here. David didn't tell you? David and I haven't exactly been in communication. Avery processed this, her expression thoughtful. The boys don't know, she said quietly. About you, I mean. They think their father died before they were born. The words hit Lucas like a sledgehammer. Not just that she'd lied to them, but that she'd chosen death over abandonment as the easier truth to explain. The implications of that choice, what it said about his actions, about the pain he'd caused, left him momentarily speechless. Avery, don't, she said sharply. Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't make this about your guilt. She took a shaky breath. I did what I thought was best for them. Children need stability, security. They need to know they're wanted, that they matter. I couldn't give them a father who might disappear again whenever life got difficult. So you gave them a dead one instead. I gave them peace, she said fiercely. I gave them bedtime stories about a hero who loved them but couldn't stay. I gave them a father they could miss without wondering if they weren't enough to make him come home. The words hung between them, raw and honest and devastating. Lucas understood suddenly the impossible position he'd put her in. How do you explain to children that their father chose his fears over their existence? They look like me, he said quietly. Yes, when they get older, people will notice. They'll ask questions. I know. Avery, we need to... The study door burst open, interrupting whatever Lucas had been about to say. Ethan stood in the doorway, his small face flushed with excitement and something that might have been tears. Mama, he said, his voice high and urgent. Miles fell down the stairs. He's crying really loud and there's blood on his head and Aunt Jennifer said to come get you right now. Avery was already moving, pushing past Lucas toward the door, but she stopped just long enough to fix him with a look that contained multitudes, fear, determination, and a warning he couldn't quite interpret. This conversation isn't over, she said, but my children come first. They always come first. Then she was gone, rushing toward whatever crisis awaited, leaving Lucas standing alone in the study, with the devastating realization that he wasn't just a stranger to his sons. He was a complication their mother would protect them from, no matter the cost. Lucas followed the sound of crying down the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found the scene in the living room. Miles sitting at the bottom of the staircase, blood trickling from a cut above his left eyebrow, his face red and streaked with tears. Avery was already on her knees beside him, her hands gentle but efficient as she assessed the damage. Hey, baby, she murmured, her voice calm despite the obvious worry in her eyes. Let Mama see. You're okay. You're going to be just fine. But Miles was beyond comfort. His cries had escalated to the panicked wails of a child who was more scared than hurt, and nothing Avery said seemed to reach him. Other adults hovered nearby, Jennifer wringing her hands, David on the phone with what sounded like a medical helpline, but everyone seemed to be talking at once, adding to the chaos. Lucas moved without thinking. Miles, he said, his voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. Something in his tone made the little boy look up, his gray eyes, so much like Lucas's own, wide with fear and pain. Hey, buddy, that's a pretty impressive battle wound you've got there. Miles's crying didn't stop, but it scaled back from panicked screams to hiccuping sobs. Lucas crouched down, making himself small and non-threatening, careful not to crowd Avery, but positioning himself where Miles could see him clearly. You know what that cut means? Lucas continued conversationally as if they were discussing the weather instead of a head injury. It means you're officially tough. Only the bravest kids get scars like that. It hurts, Miles whispered between sobs. I bet it does. Can I tell you a secret? Lucas waited until Miles nodded. When I was exactly your age, I fell downstairs too. Want to see my scar? Before anyone could object, Lucas pushed up his sleeve, revealing a thin white line that ran along his forearm. 16 stitches, he said proudly. My mom said I cried so loud, the whole hospital could hear me. Despite his tears, Miles leaned forward slightly, fascinated. 16. But you know what the coolest part was? Every time I looked at that scar after it healed, I remembered how brave I was, how I got through something scary and came out stronger. Avery was staring at Lucas with an expression he couldn't read, her hand still gentle on Miles's face as she cleaned the blood away with a damp cloth Jennifer had brought. But she didn't interrupt, didn't ask him to step back, didn't remind everyone that he was a stranger who had no right to comfort her son. I don't want stitches, Miles said, his voice smaller now, less panicked. Well, Lucas said thoughtfully, how about we let Mama take a really good look first? She's pretty smart about these things. And if you do need stitches, I promise they're not as scary as they sound. The doctors are really good at making them not hurt much. Will you come with me? Miles asked, the question so innocent and trusting that Lucas felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Before Lucas could answer, Avery spoke for the first time since he'd arrived. Miles, honey. Mr. Lucas probably has other places he needs to be. Actually, Lucas interrupted gently, I don't have anywhere else to be. If it's okay with Mama, I'd be happy to come with you. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. David and Jennifer exchanged glances. Ethan, who had been hovering anxiously near his brother, looked between Lucas and his mother with the sharp awareness that children sometimes possess about adult complications. Please, Mama, Miles asked, reaching out to touch Avery's face with his small sticky fingers. Mr. Lucas has scars too. He knows about being brave. Avery's resolve wavered. Lucas could see the internal battle playing out across her features, the practical mother who would accept help from anyone if it meant comforting her injured child, warring with the protective guardian who had spent 5 years shielding her sons from the possibility of abandonment. Okay, she said finally. If Mr. Lucas wants to come, he can come. The drive to the emergency room was surreal. Lucas sat in the backseat of Avery's Honda Civic, a practical, safe family car that was the antithesis of every vehicle he'd owned in the past 5 years, with Miles on his lap and Ethan pressed against his other side. Avery had deemed it safer than moving Miles to a car seat with a head injury, and the boys had accepted this arrangement with the adaptability that children possessed. Tell us about your other scars, Ethan demanded as they navigated through surprisingly light Christmas Eve traffic. Other scars? Lucas asked. You said you had 16 stitches when you were our age. What about when you were bigger? Lucas found himself telling them about the time he'd tried to fix a fence on his grandfather's farm and ended up with a tetanus shot and a healthy respect for rusty wire, about the childhood accident with a bicycle in a gravel driveway that had left him with permanently scarred knees, about the appendectomy scar that he'd been secretly proud of in high school because it made him feel tough. The boys listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking for clarification or offering their own stories of minor injuries and adventures. Ethan had once needed 3 stitches after a playground incident. Miles had broken his wrist learning to ride a bike but had insisted on getting back on the next day. You were very brave, Lucas told Miles seriously. Both times. Mama says brave doesn't mean not being scared, Ethan offered. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared. In the rearview mirror, Lucas caught Avery's eyes. She'd been listening to the conversation, he realized, and something in her expression had softened almost imperceptibly. Your mama's right, Lucas said. That's exactly what brave means. At the hospital, they discovered that Miles needed 4 stitches, enough to feel important, not enough to be genuinely serious. The doctor was a cheerful woman in her 50s, who let Miles choose the color of his bandage and gave him a sticker that declared him officially brave. Lucas stayed by Miles's side through the entire procedure, holding his hand and continuing the stream of stories and gentle conversation that seemed to keep the little boy calm. When it was over, Miles insisted on showing everyone his battle wound and announcing that he now had scars just like Mr. Lucas. It wasn't until they were back in the car heading home that the full weight of the evening hit Lucas. He'd spent 3 hours being exactly the kind of father he'd never imagined he could be. Patient, comforting, instinctively protective, and more importantly, his sons had responded to him with the kind of trust and acceptance that should have taken years to build. "Thank you," Avery said quietly as they pulled into David's driveway. The boys had both fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the excitement and drama of their adventure. For what? For helping? For being... She paused, searching for words. For being good with them. Lucas studied her profile in the dim light from the street lamp. "They're incredible kids, Avery. You've done something amazing. They're not just incredible kids, Lucas." Her voice was very quiet, very careful. "They're your kids. And tonight, for the first time, I saw what that might actually mean." She turned to look at him then, and in her eyes was something that terrified him more than any business negotiation ever had. Possibility. The terrifying, wonderful possibility that he might get a second chance he'd never deserved. "I need time to think," she continued, "about what this means, about what's best for them. But Lucas, if you're serious about wanting to be part of their lives, if you're really ready to put them first no matter what," she took a shaky breath, "then maybe we need to have a very different conversation than the one we started tonight." As if summoned by some cosmic sense of timing, both boys stirred in the back seat. "Are we home?" Miles asked sleepily, his small hand automatically reaching for his brother. "We're home," Avery confirmed, though her eyes never left Lucas's face. "We're all home." But as Lucas helped carry sleeping children into the house, as he watched Avery tuck them into makeshift beds on David's couch with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this alone countless times, he realized that home had become something far more complicated than he'd ever imagined, because somewhere between the emergency room and this moment, he'd stopped being a successful stranger and become a father who had years of bedtime stories to make up for. Lucas woke up in David's guest bedroom at 6:30 in the morning, his internal clock still programmed for international business calls and emergency meetings that had defined his life for half a decade. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house full of families, muffled voices from downstairs, the distant sound of running water, and something he couldn't immediately identify. Then he realized what it was. Children's laughter. He dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, ran his hands through his hair to make himself presentable, and followed the sounds downstairs. The scene in the kitchen stopped him in the doorway. Avery stood at the stove, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater that made her look younger than her 36 years. She was making what appeared to be pancakes, orchestrating multiple tasks with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to manage chaos alone. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, coloring carefully in what looked like a Christmas coloring book, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Miles was in a booster seat beside him, sporting his bandage like a badge of honor, and explaining in great detail to anyone who would listen about his brave adventure with Mr. Lucas. "And then the doctor lady said I was officially brave," Miles was saying to Jennifer, who sat across from him with a cup of coffee and an expression of amused attention. "And Mr. Lucas said that meant I was in a very special club." "What kind of club?" Jennifer asked, playing along. "The Scar Club," Miles announced proudly. "Only brave people get to be in it." "That sounds like a very exclusive club," Jennifer said seriously. "It is. Mr. Lucas is the president." Lucas found himself smiling despite the strange ache in his chest. He'd never been anyone's hero before, never been someone a child looked up to with such uncomplicated admiration. In his business world, respect came with fear, admiration came with calculation. This was something entirely different. "Good morning," Avery said, noticing him in the doorway. Her voice was carefully neutral, but not cold. "Progress, maybe." "Morning," Lucas replied. "How's the patient?" "Perfect," Miles called out before Avery could answer. "Look." He pointed to his forehead where the bandage was decorated with small dinosaur stickers. "The nurse lady gave me extras." "Very impressive," Lucas said, moving into the kitchen. "Those are definitely the best kind of bandages." "Mama said you might want coffee," Ethan said, looking up from his coloring. "She made extra." The casual thoughtfulness of the gesture, Avery anticipating his needs, including him in the morning routine as if he belonged here, caught Lucas off guard. "Thank you. That's very considerate." Avery poured coffee into a mug without being asked, adding cream the way he'd always preferred it. She remembered. After 5 years of silence, she remembered exactly how he liked his morning coffee. "Sleep okay?" she asked, handing him the mug. "Better than I have in months," Lucas admitted, then realized how that might sound. I know what you mean," she said quietly. "This house has always been peaceful." They stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Around them, the domestic chaos continued. David appeared to steal a piece of bacon from the pan. Jennifer was helping Miles add more stickers to his bandage. Ethan was showing his artwork to anyone within viewing distance. It was everything Lucas had convinced himself he didn't want during their marriage. The noise, the constant demands for attention, the inability to focus on anything for more than 5 minutes without interruption. Now, standing in the middle of it, he couldn't understand how he'd ever thought this was chaos instead of music. "Mr. Lucas," Ethan said suddenly, "do you want to see my picture?" Lucas set down his coffee and moved to look over Ethan's shoulder. The coloring book page showed a Christmas tree, but Ethan had added his own artistic interpretation. Small figures that appeared to be a family standing around the tree. "That's very good," Lucas said. "Tell me about it." "That's me and Miles." Ethan pointed to 2 small figures. "And that's Mama. And that's—" He paused, his small finger hovering over a 4th figure he'd drawn in. "I don't know who that is yet." The innocence of the statement, the unconscious way this child seemed to be making space for possibilities he didn't even understand, made Lucas's throat tighten. "Well," Lucas said carefully, "whoever that is, they're lucky to be in such a nice picture with such a nice family." Ethan beamed and returned to his coloring, apparently satisfied with this answer. Avery was watching this interaction with an expression Lucas couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, she looked away quickly, busying herself with flipping pancakes. "Can I help with anything?" Lucas asked. "You could set the table," she said after a moment. "Plates are in the cabinet above the dishwasher." It was such a normal, domestic request that Lucas almost didn't know how to respond. When was the last time someone had asked him to set a table? When was the last time he'd eaten breakfast anywhere other than a hotel restaurant or his empty penthouse? He found the plates, gathered silverware, and began setting places around the table. The boys watched his progress with interest, occasionally offering suggestions about where things should go. "Forks go on the left," Miles informed him helpfully. "Thank you, that's very important," Lucas said seriously, adjusting the placement. "And the napkins go under the forks," Ethan added. "Good thing you 2 are here to supervise. I clearly need the help." Both boys giggled at this, and Lucas felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in his chest. He was making them happy. These small people who shared his DNA and his stubborn chin and his gray eyes were genuinely enjoying his company. "All right, breakfast is ready," Avery announced, bringing a platter of pancakes to the table. The meal that followed was unlike anything Lucas had experienced in years. The conversation flowed from topic to topic with the random logic of children's minds, from Miles's bandage to Christmas presents to whether dinosaurs would have liked pancakes. Ethan asked thoughtful questions about everything from why syrup was sticky to whether birds got cold in winter. Miles provided running commentary on the relative merits of different pancake shapes. Avery managed it all with patient grace, answering questions, mediating small disputes over syrup distribution, and keeping both boys fed and engaged. Lucas found himself watching her as much as listening to the conversation, marveling at the woman she'd become in his absence. She'd always been nurturing, but this was something more evolved. A competence that came from years of practice. A confidence that came from successfully navigating countless mornings just like this one. She'd built a life, created stability, raised 2 incredible children entirely on her own, and he'd missed all of it. "Mr. Lucas," Miles said suddenly, syrup decorating his chin, "are you going to stay with us now?" The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with implications. Everyone at the table went still. Even Ethan stopped cutting his pancakes to await the answer. Lucas looked at Avery, trying to read her expression, searching for guidance about how to navigate this minefield of hope and expectation. Lucas started, then stopped. "How do you tell children that you don't know if their mother will let you stay? How do you explain that your presence in their lives depends on conversations that haven't happened yet, forgiveness that might not come, trust that might be impossible to rebuild?" Before he could formulate an answer, Avery's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered with obvious reluctance. "Hello, Mom." Even from across the table, Lucas could hear the sharp, agitated voice on the other end of the line. "No, everything's fine," Avery said. her tone becoming carefully controlled. Yes, we're still at David's. No, there's no emergency. The voice on the phone became more insistent, and Avery's expression shifted from mild annoyance to something closer to alarm. Mom, slow down. What are you talking about? There was a pause. What do you mean, you saw the news? Lucas felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. In the whirlwind of Christmas Eve revelations and emergency room visits, he'd completely forgotten about the outside world, about the empire he'd built, about the business complications that had been brewing when he decided to disappear for the holidays. I need to take this, Avery said, standing from the table. Boys, finish your breakfast. I'll be right back. She walked toward the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, but Lucas caught fragments of the conversation. I don't care what the internet says. Not public information. How did they even find out? Lucas closed his eyes, understanding with horrible clarity what must have happened. Someone had seen him. Someone had taken pictures. Someone had connected the dots between Lucas Everhart, missing billionaire, and the small family he'd been photographed with at the emergency room. Because in the age of smartphones and social media, nothing stayed private for long, especially not the sudden reappearance of a man who'd vanished 5 years ago, now apparently playing father to children whose existence he'd never acknowledged. When Avery returned to the kitchen, her face was pale and her hands were shaking. Lucas, she said, her voice very carefully controlled. We need to talk. Right now. The study felt smaller than it had the night before, the walls closing in as Avery showed Lucas her phone screen. The headline made his blood run cold. Billionaire's secret family. Lucas Everhart spotted with mystery woman and twin sons. Below it, a series of photos that must have been taken at the hospital. Lucas carrying Miles. Avery holding Ethan's hand. The four of them walking together toward the parking garage, looking for all the world like a family. There are 12 articles already, Avery said, her voice tight with controlled panic. And it's not even 9 in the morning. Lucas scrolled through the photos with growing horror. Someone had been following them, documenting what should have been a private family emergency. The images were clear enough to show Miles's bandage, intimate enough to capture the tender way Lucas had held his injured son. How did they even know? Avery continued. You've been gone for 5 years. How does someone just happen to recognize you at a random hospital on Christmas Eve? Lucas set the phone down carefully, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone at the emergency room, maybe. Or, he paused, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. Someone might have been watching me since I got back to town. Watching you? Why would anyone be watching you? Before Lucas could answer, his own phone began ringing. The caller ID showed a number he recognized. His head of security. Someone who only called when there was a crisis that required immediate damage control. I have to take this, Lucas said. Lucas, where the hell are you? The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Stone, his security chief and the closest thing Lucas had to a friend in his business world. The media is going insane. Someone leaked photos of you with some woman and kids. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Marcus, I need you to... Are those your kids, Lucas? Because if they are, we have a major problem. The board is already calling emergency meetings. Your disappearing act was bad enough, but secret children? That's the kind of scandal that brings down companies. Lucas glanced at Avery, who was listening to every word with growing alarm. We'll discuss this later, Lucas said curtly. Right now I need you to find out how those photos were taken and by whom. Lucas, you need to get back to New York immediately. Richard Blackstone is already making moves. Richard Blackstone? Lucas's blood chilled. Richard Blackstone, his former business partner and current competitor. The man who'd been trying to acquire Everhart Infrastructure for 3 years. What does he have to do with this? He's been buying up shares through shell companies for months. If this scandal destabilizes your position with the board, he could make a play for a hostile takeover. Lucas, you could lose everything. The phone went dead. Lucas stared at the screen, the magnitude of the situation settling over him like a weight. He'd built his empire carefully, methodically, but it was still largely dependent on his personal reputation, his relationships with investors, his image as the controlled, successful businessman who never made mistakes. Secret children were definitely a mistake in their eyes. Lucas? Avery's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's happening? He looked up to find her watching him with an expression that was shifting from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been betrayal. Tell me, she said quietly. Tell me this isn't going to destroy their lives. It won't, Lucas said quickly. I can handle this, Can you? Her voice was getting sharper. Because it sounds like you're about to lose your company. It sounds like someone is using my children as weapons against you. It sounds like being associated with you just made us targets. Lucas started to respond, but she held up a hand to stop him. No, she said. You don't get to make promises you can't keep. Not about this. Not about them. From the kitchen came the sound of Miles calling for his mama, followed by Ethan asking why the grown-ups were being so quiet. Normal childhood concerns, blissfully unaware that their faces were already being broadcast across the internet. They don't understand what's happening, Avery said, her voice breaking slightly. They think you're just a nice man who helped Miles with his hurt. They don't know that being connected to you might mean photographers following them to school, reporters asking their friends questions, strangers knowing their names. Avery, I swear to you I will not let that happen. How? She demanded. How exactly will you stop it? You couldn't even control it happening in the first place. Lucas opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. For all his wealth and influence, he'd been powerless to prevent this invasion of their privacy. And if Richard Blackstone was really making a move against his company, Lucas's ability to protect anyone might be about to disappear entirely. I need to go back to New York, he said finally. I need to handle this before it gets worse. Of course you do. Avery's laugh was bitter. 5 years ago you disappeared when things got complicated. Now you're going to run away again the moment being here becomes inconvenient. That's not what this is, isn't it? She moved toward the door, then stopped with her hand on the knob. You know what the worst part is, Lucas? For about 12 hours I actually believed you might have changed. I watched you with Miles last night, and I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd learned what was actually important. They are important, Lucas said desperately. They're the most important thing. Then prove it. Avery turned back to face him, and there were tears in her eyes she was trying not to shed. Don't just tell me they matter. Show me. Choose them over your empire, your reputation, your precious business deals. I can do both, Lucas insisted. I can protect them and handle this crisis. No, you can't. Her voice was very quiet now, very final. You never could do both. That's why our marriage fell apart. That's why you left. And that's why this is going to end exactly the same way it did before. She opened the door, then paused one more time. I'm taking the boys home, she said. We'll figure out how to handle the media attention, how to keep them safe, how to explain why their pictures are on the internet. We'll do what we always do. We'll handle it ourselves. Avery, wait. But she was already walking away, leaving Lucas alone with the devastating realization that in trying to protect his sons, he might have lost them forever. From the kitchen, he could hear her talking to the boys in that same calm, reassuring voice she'd used in the emergency room, explaining that they needed to go home, that it was time to pack up their things, that this had been a lovely visit, but now it was over. Miles asked if Mr. Lucas was coming with them. No, sweetheart, Avery replied. Mr. Lucas has to go take care of some work things. Will we see him again? Ethan wanted to know. There was a long pause before Avery answered. I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know. Lucas stood at the study window, watching through the blinds as Avery loaded the boys into her car 20 minutes later. Miles waved enthusiastically from his car seat, pressing his face against the window and mouthing, Bye-bye, Mr. Lucas, with his bandaged forehead catching the morning sunlight. Ethan was more subdued, seeming to sense that something significant was ending before it had really begun. As the car disappeared down the street, Lucas's phone rang again. Marcus, probably, with more bad news about shareholders and hostile takeovers and the empire that was supposedly everything he'd worked for. But for the first time in his adult life, Lucas ignored the call, because watching his sons drive away felt like losing everything that had ever truly mattered, and no amount of money was going to fix that. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. This time, the caller ID made Lucas's blood run cold. Richard Blackstone. His enemy was calling personally, which meant the attack was about to begin in earnest, and Lucas had just lost the only reason he'd ever had for fighting back. Lucas stared at Richard Blackstone's name on his phone screen for 3 rings before answering. Richard. Lucas. My old friend. Blackstone's voice carried that familiar blend of charm and venom that had made him both successful and dangerous in equal measure. Congratulations. I hear fatherhood suits you. What do you want? Straight to business. I always admired that about you. Lucas could hear the smile in Blackstone's voice. I want Everhart infrastructure. I've wanted it for 3 years, as you well know, but until now you've been untouchable. Lucas walked to the window, watching the empty street where his family had disappeared 20 minutes earlier. And now? Now you're a man with secrets. A man who abandoned his pregnant wife and disappeared for 5 years. A man whose own board of directors is questioning his judgment and stability. Blackstone paused for effect. A man who's about to lose everything he's built unless he's very, very smart about what happens next. I'm listening. Smart man, here's my offer. You sell me controlling interest in Everhart Infrastructure for 40% below market value. In return, I make this media nightmare disappear. No more photographers following your family. No more headlines about deadbeat billionaire fathers. No more questions about your fitness to run a company. Lucas felt something cold settle in his chest. You orchestrated this. I hired a very discreet investigator to keep tabs on your activities when you returned to town. Imagine my surprise when he reported that you'd been spotted with a woman and children who bore a striking resemblance to you. Blackstone's voice turned mockingly sympathetic. These things have a way of getting out, Lucas, especially when there's money involved. You leaked the photos. I facilitated their distribution, yes. Amazing how much money people will pay for exclusive images of a missing billionaire's secret family. The photographer made enough to retire comfortably. Lucas closed his eyes, understanding the full scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't just business competition. It was calculated destruction. So here we are, Blackstone continued. You can fight this, of course. Spend months in court battles while the media circus continues. Watch your company's stock price plummet as investors lose confidence. See your children's faces on tabloid covers as their father's reputation is systematically demolished. Or you take my offer, sign the papers, walk away with enough money to live comfortably forever, and I guarantee your family disappears from public interest. No more photos, no more stories, no more invasion of their privacy. Lucas found himself thinking about Miles's eager face pressed against the car window, waving goodbye, about Ethan's careful drawing with the mysterious fourth figure, about Avery's voice when she'd said she didn't know if they'd see him again. I need time to consider. You have until tomorrow morning. Blackstone cut him off. After that, things get much worse for everyone involved. And Lucas, don't think about running again. I'll make sure this story follows you anywhere you go. The line went dead. Lucas stood holding his phone, feeling the walls of his carefully constructed life collapsing around him. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd convinced himself mattered. It could all disappear in a single business day. His phone buzzed with a text message. A link to a news article with a new headline. Everhart Infrastructure stock plummets amid CEO's personal scandal. Then another text, this one from his assistant. Board meeting called for tomorrow. They want answers. And another, from his head of PR. Need statement immediately. Investors pulling out. Call me. Within minutes, his phone was buzzing constantly. Calls from board members, messages from business partners, emails from reporters wanting statements. The empire he'd spent 15 years building was imploding in real time. But all Lucas could think about was a little boy asking if he was staying for Christmas, and a woman who'd looked at him with something that might have been hope before it turned to resignation. 20 miles across town, Avery sat in her kitchen staring at her own phone. The boys were in the living room, building elaborate structures with their Christmas Legos, blissfully unaware that their faces had become internet headlines. Her mother had called 6 more times. 3 of her friends had texted asking if the rumors were true. Even her neighbor had knocked on the door, claiming she wanted to borrow sugar but clearly fishing for information about the famous man she'd seen in the photos. Avery had dealt with it all the same way, politely declining to comment while privately making plans to change their phone number and possibly their address. The worst part wasn't the invasion of privacy, though that was devastating enough. The worst part was the familiar feeling of being left to clean up Lucas's mess while he disappeared to handle his more important problems. Just like before, her laptop was open to a dozen news articles, each one speculating about the mystery family of the missing billionaire. Some painted her as a gold digger who'd trapped a wealthy man with pregnancy. Others portrayed Lucas as a deadbeat father who'd abandoned his responsibilities. None of them came close to the complicated truth of 2 people who'd loved each other, but couldn't build a life together. Mama, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression serious. There are cars outside with cameras. Avery's blood went cold. She moved to the front window and peered through the blinds. 3 vehicles were parked across the street, all with occupants holding professional cameras with long lenses pointed at her house. What are they doing? Ethan asked, joining her at the window. Taking pictures, Avery said, trying to keep her voice calm. Why? Because sometimes grown-ups are curious about things that aren't their business. Miles bounded into the room, oblivious to the tension. "Can we go to the park? I want to show everyone my bandage." "Not today, sweetheart," Avery said, her mind racing. "Today we're having an inside day." "But I want to go outside," Miles protested. "I want to ride my bike." "Tomorrow," Avery promised, though she had no idea if that would be true. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed an unknown number with a New York area code. "Hello? Ms. Collins? This is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Lucas Everhart." Avery hung up immediately, but the phone started ringing again within seconds. Different number, same request. She turned the phone off and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to think clearly. She could handle reporters. She could handle invasive neighbors and curious friends. What she couldn't handle was the possibility that this would never end, that her sons would grow up with cameras following them because their father was a public figure who'd made private choices public spectacles. That's when she realized the fundamental impossibility of the situation. Lucas Everhart couldn't be a private father to her children because Lucas Everhart didn't exist as a private person. He was a brand, a public entity, a man whose personal life would always be consumed by his professional identity. She'd fallen in love with Lucas the college student, married Lucas the ambitious young businessman, and been abandoned by Lucas the rising entrepreneur. But the man outside her house in those photographs was Lucas the billionaire, Lucas the public figure, Lucas the man whose private moments were worth money to people who'd never met him. And her sons deserved better than a father whose love came with paparazzi. Avery was so lost in this realization that she almost missed the sound of a car door slamming outside. When she looked through the blinds again, her heart stopped. Lucas was standing in her driveway, facing off with 3 photographers who were already snapping pictures of his arrival. He was wearing the same clothes from that morning, but something about his posture had changed. Gone was the confident businessman's bearing, the controlled authority that had defined every movement for as long as she'd known him. He looked tired. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who'd finally run out of places to run. And despite everything, despite the photographers, despite the betrayal, despite the impossible situation he'd created, Avery found herself hoping that whatever had brought him back to her door was big enough to change everything. Because if it wasn't, this would be the last time she let him break her sons' hearts. Lucas stood in Avery's driveway, surrounded by photographers whose cameras clicked like hungry insects. Questions flew at him from all directions, about his disappearance, about the children, about his company's plummeting stock price. He ignored them all, his focus entirely on the front door of the modest 2-story house where his family was trapped. "Mr. Everhart, can you confirm these are your biological children? What's your response to allegations of abandonment? Is it true you've lost control of your company?" Lucas turned to face the nearest photographer, a thin man with aggressive eyes who kept trying to get around him toward the house. "You have 30 seconds to get off this property before I call the police," Lucas said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is a public street," the photographer shot back. "We have every right to be here." "You have the right to be on the street," Lucas corrected. "You don't have the right to harass a family in their home. And if any of you take one more picture of those children, I'll make sure your employers hear from my legal team." It was an empty threat. Lucas's legal team was probably busy preparing his corporate obituary, but something in his tone made several of the photographers step back slightly. The front door opened and Avery appeared, her face pale but determined. "Lucas," she said quietly, "you need to leave. You're making this worse." "I'm not going anywhere," he replied, not breaking eye contact with the photographers. "Not until they do." "Daddy?" The small voice came from behind Avery, and everyone, photographers, reporters, Lucas himself, went completely still. Miles had appeared in the doorway, his bandaged forehead wrinkled in confusion as he looked at the crowd of strangers with cameras. He was holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur, the one he'd apparently been too shy to bring to David's house, but trusted enough to carry now. "Why are all these people taking pictures of our house?" he asked innocently. The word "daddy" hung in the air like an explosion. Camera shutters went crazy, photographers pushing closer, sensing the story of a lifetime unfolding in real time. Lucas felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The business world, the board meetings, the hostile takeovers, none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the small boy who'd just called him daddy in front of the entire world. "Miles," Avery said urgently, reaching for her son, "come back inside." But Lucas was already moving. He scooped Miles into his arms, shielding the little boy's face from the cameras, and turned to address the crowd of photographers with a voice that carried 15 years of commanding boardrooms. "You want a statement? Here's your statement." He held Miles protectively against his chest, the little boy's arms automatically wrapping around his neck. "My name is Lucas Everhart. These are my sons. This is their mother, and this is their home. And if any of you invade their privacy again, if you follow them to school or photograph them at the playground or make their lives difficult in any way, I will dedicate every resource I have to destroying your careers." "Mr. Everhart," one reporter called out, "can you comment on the hostile takeover attempt by Blackstone Industries?" Lucas looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting this moment live to whoever was watching. "Richard Blackstone can have my company," he said clearly. "He can have my buildings, my contracts, my entire empire, but he will not have my family. And if he thinks he can use my children as leverage in his business games, he's about to discover exactly how wrong he is." The crowd erupted in questions, but Lucas was already turning toward the house, carrying Miles and gesturing for Avery to go inside. "Daddy, why are you on TV?" Miles asked, apparently unbothered by the chaos around them. "Because grown-ups sometimes make things more complicated than they need to be," Lucas replied, following Avery into the house and closing the door firmly behind them. Inside, Ethan was pressed against the living room window, watching the scene outside with wide eyes. "Mr. Lucas," he exclaimed, running over. "Those people are really loud, and they keep taking pictures of our house." "I know," Lucas said, setting Miles down but staying crouched at their eye level. "They're going to go away soon." "Are you really our daddy?" Miles asked, apparently having processed the conversation outside. The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. He looked at Avery, who was standing frozen in the hallway, her expression unreadable. "Would you like me to be?" Lucas asked carefully. Both boys nodded enthusiastically. "Then yes," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I'm your daddy, and I'm very sorry it took me so long to come home." "Where were you?" Ethan asked with the directness that only children possessed. "I was lost," Lucas admitted. "I was scared and confused, and I made some very bad choices. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again." "Promise?" Miles demanded. Lucas looked over their heads at Avery, who was watching this exchange with tears she was trying not to shed. "I promise," he said. Avery finally found her voice. "Boys, why don't you go play in your room for a little while? Daddy and I need to have a grown-up conversation." "Can Daddy come see our room after?" Ethan asked hopefully. "We'll see," Avery said, which both boys seemed to accept as a qualified yes. After they'd thundered upstairs, Avery turned to face Lucas with an expression that was part wonder, part terror. "Did you just walk away from your company?" she asked quietly. "On live television?" "Yes." "Lucas, you can't just... That's your entire life's work, everything you built." "Everything I built without you, without them." Lucas gestured toward the stairs where they could hear the boys' voices. "What's the point of an empire if you're ruling it alone?" Avery sat down heavily on the couch as if her legs couldn't support her anymore. "This is crazy," she said. 5 years ago, you couldn't handle the idea of having children. Now you're willing to lose everything for them. 5 years ago, I was an idiot," Lucas said, sitting down across from her. "I thought success meant having control over everything, including my personal life. I thought love was a weakness that would make me vulnerable. And now I understand that I've been vulnerable all along. I just didn't know it." Lucas leaned forward, trying to find the words for something he'd never said out loud. "I've spent 5 years building an empire, Avery. I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. I have influence that reaches across continents. But this morning, watching a 5-year-old boy call me daddy for the first time," he paused. "That was the most powerful I've ever felt in my life." Avery was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to determine whether this transformation was real or temporary. "Blackstone won't stop," she said finally. "You've just made this very public. He'll come after you even harder now. Let him. I have something worth fighting for now. And when the fight gets ugly, when it affects the boys, when they can't go to school because of photographers, when their friends' parents whisper about them, when they start asking questions about why their father's face is always in the news." Avery's voice was getting stronger, more challenging. "What happens then, Lucas? Do you disappear again when the reality of being a public parent becomes too difficult?" It was the question Lucas had been dreading, the test he'd failed before. But looking around this house, at the children's artwork on the refrigerator, at the family photos covering the mantelpiece, At the evidence of the life Avery had built for their sons, he realized he finally knew the answer. Then we figure it out, he said simply. Together, as a family. And if being Lucas Everhart makes their lives harder, then maybe it's time for Lucas Everhart to disappear and for me to become just their father. Before Avery could respond, Lucas's phone rang. The caller ID made him smile grimly. Richard Blackstone, probably calling to gloat about the public spectacle Lucas had just made of himself. Lucas answered the phone and put it on speaker. Richard. Well, Blackstone's voice filled the room. That was quite a performance. Very touching. Very public, very stupid. Get to the point. The point, Lucas, is that you've just handed me everything I wanted on a silver platter. Your board saw that little display. Your investors saw you walk away from the company on live television. By tomorrow morning, I'll own Everhart Infrastructure for half what I was willing to pay an hour ago. Lucas looked at Avery, who was listening with growing alarm. Congratulations, Lucas said calmly. The silence on the other end was telling. I'm sorry, what? I said congratulations, you've won. Take the company. Enjoy it. This isn't how this was supposed to go, Blackstone sputtered. You're supposed to fight me. You're supposed to choose your empire over your family just like you did 5 years ago. 5 years ago I was an idiot, Lucas repeated. Today I'm a father, and fathers don't sacrifice their children for business deals. You'll regret this, Blackstone said, his voice turning ugly. When the money runs out, when the novelty wears off, when you remember what it was like to have power, I'll remember what it was like to be alone. Lucas cut him off. And I'll be grateful I chose better this time. He hung up the phone and looked at Avery, who was staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. He's right, you know, she said quietly. You will lose everything. No, Lucas said, standing up as the sounds of his sons playing upstairs filled the silence. I'll lose money, I'll lose business interests. I'll lose the kind of power that exists only in boardrooms. He moved toward the stairs, drawn by the sound of their laughter. But I've already lost the only things that actually mattered once. I'm not making that mistake again. From upstairs came Miles's voice calling, Daddy, come see what we built. And for the first time in his adult life, Lucas Everhart had somewhere more important to be than anywhere else in the world. The boys' bedroom was a universe Lucas had never imagined. 2 twin beds sat against opposite walls, each reflecting its owner's personality with startling clarity. Ethan's side was meticulously organized, books arranged by height, art supplies in labeled containers, a small desk where he apparently did puzzles and homework. Miles's side looked like a tornado had hit a toy store, but there was logic to the chaos. Action figures arranged in elaborate battle scenes, building blocks forming impossible architectural structures, drawings taped to every available surface. But it was the wall between their beds that stopped Lucas cold. A timeline of their lives stretched across the painted surface, marked with photos, drawings, and small mementos. Their first steps, documented in Avery's careful handwriting. Christmas mornings where they sat surrounded by presents, grinning gap-toothed smiles at the camera. Birthday parties, first days of school, soccer practices, Halloween costumes. 5 years of life, 5 years of memories, 5 years of moments that Lucas would never get back. This is our memory wall, Ethan explained, following Lucas's gaze. Mama started it when we were babies. Every time something important happens, we add it. Miles chimed in, bouncing on his bed with the energy of someone who'd forgotten about bandages and reporters and grown-up complications. Look, this is when I lost my first tooth. He pointed to a photo of himself, probably age 3, beaming proudly while holding up a tiny white tooth. And this is when Ethan learned to read, Miles continued, indicating a picture of his brother sitting with a book that looked far too advanced for a 4-year-old. Lucas studied each image, trying to absorb years of missed experiences in a matter of minutes. Here was Miles taking his first bike ride, Avery running beside him with one hand on the seat. There was Ethan at what appeared to be a science museum, explaining something to the camera with the serious expression of a professor. Bath time, bedtime stories, quiet mornings, chaotic afternoons, a life, a complete beautiful life that had happened without him. Where do we put the new pictures? Miles asked suddenly. The ones with Daddy in them? The question was so innocent, so hopeful, that Lucas felt his chest tighten. These children had created space for him in their world before he'd even known they existed. We'll figure that out together, Lucas said, his voice rougher than he intended. Can you help us build something? Ethan asked, apparently satisfied with this answer. We're making a castle, but we can't get the towers right. For the next hour, Lucas found himself on the floor of his son's bedroom, surrounded by blocks and action figures and the kind of creative chaos he'd spent his adult life avoiding. The boys chattered constantly about their construction project, about school, about their friends, about 100 small details that made up their daily existence. Lucas learned that Ethan was afraid of thunderstorms but loved to watch lightning from inside the house, that Miles could identify 12 different types of dinosaurs but couldn't tie his shoes, that they both missed their grandmother, Avery's mother, who lived in Florida and sent packages full of books and puzzles, that they took swimming lessons on Tuesdays and soccer practice on Saturdays, and that their favorite dinner was spaghetti with just a little bit of sauce. Ordinary details of ordinary childhoods that felt like the most extraordinary things Lucas had ever heard. "Daddy," Miles said suddenly, using the title with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted it belonged to him. "Why did you have to work so far away for so long?" The question hit Lucas like a physical blow. He'd been dreading this moment, the inevitable interrogation about his absence, the impossible task of explaining adult failures to children who deserved better. "Well," Lucas said carefully, "sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. They think they know what's important, but they get confused and choose the wrong things." "What wrong things?" Ethan asked with characteristic directness. "I thought having lots of money and a big company was more important than being with people I loved." Both boys considered this with the seriousness they applied to all adult mysteries. "That's silly," Miles announced finally. "Money can't hug you." "You're absolutely right," Lucas agreed. "It was very silly. But you know better now?" Ethan pressed. "I know better now." "Good," Miles said, apparently considering the matter settled. "Now help me put the dragon on the castle. He's supposed to be guarding the treasure." From downstairs came the sound of Avery's voice, though Lucas couldn't make out the words. The tone was sharp, professional, the voice she used when dealing with problems. "Boys," Lucas said, "keep working on the castle. I'll be right back." He found Avery in the kitchen pacing while talking on the phone. Through the window he could see that most of the photographers had left, but 2 cars remained stationed across the street. "Understand that this is a private residence," Avery was saying. "My children live here. They're 4 years old. They don't deserve to be treated like public spectacle." She noticed Lucas and held up one finger, indicating she'd be off soon. "No, I will not be giving any interviews," she continued firmly. "No, you cannot speak to the children. No, we will not be posing for any family photos." She paused, listening. "If you contact me again, I'll be referring all communication to our attorney." She hung up and immediately rubbed her temples, the gesture so familiar that Lucas felt transported back 5 years, to when work stress and life pressures had begun eating away at their marriage. "More reporters?" he asked. 3 different morning shows, 2 magazines, and something called a lifestyle brand that wants to partner with us. Avery's laugh was bitter. "Apparently we're a marketable story now. The billionaire who gave up everything for love." "I'm sorry," Lucas said. "I should have thought—" "No," Avery interrupted. "You did exactly what you should have done out there. You protected them. You put them first." She looked toward the stairs where they could hear the boys playing. I never wanted this for them. The attention, the scrutiny, the feeling that their lives don't belong to them anymore." Lucas moved closer, wanting to comfort her but unsure of his boundaries. "We'll figure out how to handle it." "How?" "You just gave away your company, Lucas. Your legal team, your security, your resources. Blackstone owns all of that now. We're on our own here." Before Lucas could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Check your email. Urgent." David Lucas frowned and pulled up his email app. The message from David was brief. "Found something you need to see about Blackstone. Call me." Attached was a PDF document that made Lucas's blood run cold as he scanned the first few lines. "What is it?" Avery asked, seeing his expression. "Blackstone didn't just orchestrate the media leak," Lucas said slowly, reading through the document. "He's been planning this for months. Look at this. He's got photographers ready to follow us everywhere. Private investigators digging into your background. He's even looked into the boys' school records." Avery snatched the phone from his hands, her face going pale as she read. "He knows where they go to school. He knows my work schedule. He knows—" She scrolled further. "He knows about Miles's allergy to peanuts, about Ethan's reading level, about their pediatrician. It gets worse," Lucas said grimly. "He's planning to use all of this information to make our lives impossible, force us into hiding, Make it impossible for the boys to have normal childhoods. The goal is to make me so desperate to protect them that I'll come crawling back, offering him even more than he originally wanted. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Blackstone hadn't won when he'd acquired Lucas's company. He'd just begun a much more personal campaign of destruction. So what do we do? Avery asked quietly. Lucas looked around the kitchen, at the children's artwork on the refrigerator, at the family calendar with soccer practices and playdates, at the evidence of the normal, peaceful life Avery had built for their sons. Then he looked upstairs where two little boys were building castles and trusting that the adults would keep them safe. "We fight back," he said, "but not the way he expects." "What does that mean?" "It means Richard Blackstone has spent his entire career underestimating the power of people who have nothing left to lose." Lucas's smile was sharp, predatory, the expression that had once made him legendary in business negotiations. And he's about to learn that a father protecting his children is the most dangerous kind of man there is. From upstairs came the sound of something crashing, followed by Miles's voice calling, "It's okay. The dragon just knocked over the tower. We can fix it." Lucas looked at Avery, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, he saw something like hope in her eyes. "Can we fix it?" she asked quietly. "We can fix it," Lucas promised. "All of it." But as he said the words, his phone buzzed again with another message. "Photos of the boys' school online. They know where your sons are." David outside. Another car pulled up across the street, and Lucas realized their real battle was just beginning. Lucas spent the next 6 hours making phone calls from Avery's kitchen table while she researched private schools and safe houses online. The boys, blissfully unaware that their world was under siege, had been relocated to the living room with strict instructions not to go near any windows. The reality of their situation was becoming clearer with each call Lucas made. Blackstone wasn't just after revenge. He was systematically dismantling any chance Lucas's family had at a normal life. Photos of the boys' preschool were circulating on social media. Their pediatrician's office had received over 40 calls from reporters. Someone had even tried to bribe their soccer coach for information about their personalities and habits. "We can't keep them prisoners in their own home," Avery said, looking up from her laptop. "Miles has a birthday party tomorrow. Ethan has a doctor's appointment for his ear infection next week. They're supposed to start swimming lessons again after New Year's. They can't go to any of those things right now," Lucas replied, hanging up from yet another unproductive conversation. "Not until we figure out how to make this stop." "And how exactly do we do that? You don't have a company anymore. You don't have lawyers or security teams or—" "I have something better," Lucas interrupted. "I have 5 years' worth of business connections who owe me favors." Before Avery could ask what he meant, Lucas's phone rang. The caller ID made him smile for the first time all day. "Marcus," Lucas answered, putting it on speaker. "Tell me you have good news." "Better than good," came the voice of his former head of security. "Blackstone made a mistake. He's been so focused on destroying your reputation that he forgot to cover his own tracks." "What do you mean?" "I mean the private investigator he hired to follow you. The photographer who leaked those hospital pictures. They're both on payroll for multiple illegal surveillance operations. And I mean seriously illegal. Corporate espionage, insider trading, blackmail schemes that go back 3 years. Lucas felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. "You have proof?" "I have enough proof to put Blackstone in federal prison for the next 20 years. But Lucas—" Marcus paused. "He knows I'm looking into him. He's accelerating whatever he has planned." As if summoned by the conversation, Lucas's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Answer your door. Now." Through the front window, Lucas could see a black sedan parked in the driveway. A man in an expensive suit was walking toward the front door, flanked by 2 others who looked distinctly like security personnel. "Get the boys upstairs," Lucas told Avery quietly. "Now." "What's happening?" she asked. But she was already moving, her maternal instincts kicking in. The doorbell rang once, then twice. Then someone started knocking, politely but persistently. "Lucas," came a voice through the door. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Not Blackstone's voice. Someone else. Someone Lucas recognized but couldn't quite place. He looked through the peephole and felt his blood turn to ice. Robert Hayes, David's father. The federal judge who'd been like a second father to Lucas during college, who'd officiated at his wedding to Avery, who'd been devastated when Lucas disappeared 5 years ago. But Robert Hayes didn't make house calls, and he definitely didn't travel with security. Lucas opened the door cautiously. Judge Hayes, what are you doing here? The older man looked exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. I'm here because someone made me an offer I couldn't refuse, he said quietly. And because I'm hoping you're smart enough to take the deal I'm about to offer you. What kind of deal? The kind where your children get to grow up safely, and you get to disappear permanently without facing federal charges for securities fraud. Lucas felt the world tilt sideways. Securities fraud? What are you talking about? May I come in? This isn't a conversation for your front porch. Against his better judgment, Lucas stepped aside. Judge Hayes entered alone, leaving his security detail outside. 5 years ago, when you liquidated your assets before disappearing, Hayes began without preamble, you moved $37 million through accounts that were later investigated for money laundering. At the time, the FBI couldn't prove you knew about the illegal activity, but new evidence has come to light. What evidence? Forged documents, falsified emails, bank records that show you were actively participating in schemes to hide money from federal oversight. Hayes's expression was pained. It's all fabricated, of course, but it's very convincing fabrication. Lucas understood immediately. Blackstone. Mr. Blackstone has been very generous with his time and resources in helping federal investigators piece together your alleged crimes, Hayes confirmed. He's also been very generous with his political contributions to certain campaigns, his donations to certain judicial retirement funds, his support for certain law enforcement initiatives. So you're here to arrest me? I'm here to offer you a choice. Hayes sat down heavily in Avery's living room chair. You can fight these charges. Spend the next 5 years in court while your family lives under constant media scrutiny and legal threats. Watch your sons grow up visiting you in federal prison. Hope that justice eventually prevails. Or you take Blackstone's deal. You sign documents admitting to minor financial irregularities, agree to a plea bargain that involves no jail time, but permanent exile from the United States. You take your family somewhere far away from here, somewhere safe, and you never come back. The silence that followed was deafening. From upstairs, Lucas could hear Avery reading to the boys, her voice calm and soothing despite the chaos unfolding below. He can't do this, Lucas said finally. You know this is all fabricated. You know I'm not a criminal. What I know and what I can prove in court are two different things, Hayes replied sadly. And what matters right now isn't justice, Lucas. What matters is keeping those children safe. Safe from what? From what happens if you fight this. Blackstone has made it very clear that if you refuse his offer, the media attention will get much worse. Your son's school will be surrounded by reporters every day. Their friends' parents will be harassed. Their lives will become impossible. Lucas felt the walls closing in. Every choice led to losing his family. Fight and watch them suffer. Run, and take them away from everything they'd ever known. There's a third option, he said quietly. What's that? I destroy Richard Blackstone first. Hayes's expression shifted to alarm. Lucas, don't do anything foolish. The man has resources you can't imagine. He has connections in... He doesn't have what I have, Lucas interrupted. Which is what? Nothing left to lose. Before Hayes could respond, Lucas's phone rang. Marcus again. Lucas, whatever you're thinking about doing, do it fast, Marcus said without preamble. Blackstone just hired a team of private military contractors. These aren't photographers or investigators. These are people who specialize in making problems disappear. Through the window, Lucas could see more cars arriving. The street was filling up with vehicles that definitely weren't media. Judge Hayes, Lucas said, his voice very calm, very controlled. I think you need to leave. Now. Lucas, please. Now. The older man gathered himself with obvious reluctance. If you change your mind, you have until midnight to call me. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. After Hayes left, Lucas called upstairs. Avery, bring the boys down. We're leaving. Where are we going? She asked, appearing at the top of the stairs with both boys behind her, their faces reflecting their mother's tension. Somewhere safe, Lucas said. Pack light and fast. But as he looked out the front window at the growing collection of vehicles surrounding their house, Lucas realized that nowhere was going to be safe until he finished what Blackstone had started. His phone buzzed with one final text message. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, I stop being reasonable. R.B. Lucas looked at his sons, who were watching him with the complete trust that children reserved for the adults who were supposed to protect them. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, Lucas Everhart smiled like the predator he'd once been in boardrooms around the world. Because Richard Blackstone was about to learn that there was a difference between a businessman trying to protect his assets and a father protecting his children, and that difference was going to destroy him. Lucas sent Avery and the boys to David's house with instructions to pack only essentials and wait for his call. As their car disappeared down the back alley, he turned to face the growing collection of vehicles surrounding the house. His phone showed 43 minutes until Blackstone's deadline. More than enough time. Lucas called Marcus first. Send everything you found on Blackstone to every major news outlet simultaneously. Financial records, surveillance evidence, the illegal operations, all of it. Lucas, if I do that now, before you're clear, do it now. And Marcus, make sure you send copies to the FBI, the SEC, and the Attorney General's office. I want criminal and federal investigators crawling all over Blackstone Industries before he realizes what's happening. Done. But Lucas, he's got private military contractors out there. This could get dangerous. Good, Lucas said, ending the call. His next call was to his former assistant, Jennifer Walsh, now probably working for Blackstone. Jennifer, it's Lucas. I need you to schedule an immediate board meeting for Everhart Infrastructure. Emergency session. Tell them I'm calling in my contractual right to address the board before the acquisition is finalized. Lucas, I can't, Mr. Blackstone said. Jennifer, in about 30 minutes, Richard Blackstone is going to be arrested on federal charges. Do you want to be implicated as an accessory, or do you want to help me save your job by getting Everhart Infrastructure out from under his control? The silence that followed told Lucas everything he needed to know. The boardroom. 1 hour, Jennifer said quietly. I'll make the calls. Lucas's third call was the most important. Richard, it's Lucas. I understand you wanted to talk. Blackstone's laugh was sharp and victorious. Finally coming to your senses? Good. My people are outside your house. We can handle the transition very quietly, very professionally. Actually, I was calling to congratulate you, Lucas said conversationally. You've been very thorough, very creative. The fabricated evidence was particularly impressive. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, just like you didn't know about the illegal surveillance operations your companies have been running, the corporate espionage, the insider trading schemes, the blackmail operations that helped you acquire 3 major competitors over the past 2 years. The silence on the other end was telling. You see, Richard, while you were focused on destroying me, I was focused on understanding you. And what I learned is that you're not just a competitor, you're a criminal. A very successful one, but still a criminal. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Bank records, communication logs, testimony from the private investigators you thought you could trust to keep quiet forever. It's all being delivered to federal authorities as we speak. Lucas could hear Blackstone's breathing change, the first crack in his composure. Even if that's true, Blackstone said slowly, you'll still go down with me. Those fabricated documents I showed the FBI, they're good enough to convince a jury. About that, Lucas said, walking to the front window where he could see Blackstone's people positioning themselves around the house. Falsifying federal documents is a felony. Creating fraudulent evidence to frame someone for securities fraud is conspiracy to commit perjury. And when the FBI discovers that you've been bribing federal judges and law enforcement officials to support your schemes, Lucas paused. Well, that's what we call a life sentence. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. What do you want? Blackstone asked finally, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. I want you to call off your people. I want you to withdraw all fabricated evidence against me. I want you to transfer ownership of Everhart Infrastructure back to the board of directors so they can make decisions without coercion. And I want you to leave my family alone forever. And in return? In return, I give you a 30-minute head start before the FBI arrives at your office. Use it wisely. You're bluffing, Blackstone said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Am I? Jennifer Walsh just confirmed that the Everhart board is meeting in emergency session in 45 minutes. Marcus Stone is personally delivering evidence of your criminal activities to 3 different federal agencies. And Judge Hayes, remember him? He's about to discover that you've been using fabricated evidence to manipulate federal cases, which means every case he's touched in the past year is now under investigation. Lucas watched through the window as several of the cars around his house began starting their engines. You see, Richard, the difference between you and me isn't that I'm more ruthless. It's that I finally found something worth being ruthless for. You're trying to destroy my empire. I'm protecting my family. And a father protecting his children will always be more dangerous than a businessman protecting his assets. The line went quiet for a long moment. When Blackstone spoke again, his voice was barely controlled rage. This isn't over, Everhart. Yes, it is, Lucas said calmly. Yes. Because in about 20 minutes, when the FBI starts seizing your assets and freezing your accounts, you'll realize that you never understood the most important rule of business warfare. Never attack someone's family unless you're prepared to lose everything. Lucas hung up and immediately called Avery. "It's done," he said. "Blackstone's finished. You can bring the boys home." "What did you do?" I reminded him why he should have stuck to business instead of making this personal. From his window, Lucas watched as the last of Blackstone's vehicles pulled away from the house. In the distance, he could see police cars and federal vehicles heading toward downtown, where Richard Blackstone was about to discover that stealing companies was a misdemeanor compared to threatening families. 23 minutes later, Lucas's phone rang with a call from Jennifer. "The board just voted unanimously to restore you as CEO of Everhart Infrastructure," she said. "Blackstone's acquisition has been declared null and void due to fraudulent documentation. Also, the FBI just arrested him for conspiracy, fraud, and about 12 other charges I can't pronounce." Lucas felt a strange sense of completion settle over him. The empire was back in his hands. His enemy was destroyed. His family was safe. And for the first time in his life, none of the business victories mattered as much as hearing a car pull into his driveway and knowing that his sons were coming home. Avery appeared first, scanning the now empty street with suspicious eyes. Then came the boys running toward the front door with the boundless energy of children who'd been confined too long. "Daddy," Miles called out, launching himself into Lucas's arms. "Are the bad people gone?" "The bad people are gone," Lucas confirmed, catching Ethan as well and lifting both boys simultaneously. But as he carried his sons into the house, Lucas's phone buzzed with one final message from an unknown number. "Well played, Everhart. But this family reunion won't last long. Some people don't stay buried. A friend." Lucas stared at the message, a chill running down his spine. Blackstone was in federal custody. His operations were dismantled. His people had scattered. So who had sent this message? And what did they mean about someone not staying buried? As he looked at his family, at Avery hanging up their coats, at the boys already running to show him their latest creations, Lucas realized that winning this battle might have revealed the existence of a much larger war, one that was just beginning. 2 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the renovated farmhouse, mixing with the late afternoon breeze that carried the scent of apple blossoms from the orchard Lucas had planted last spring. He stood at the kitchen sink, washing paintbrushes while watching Ethan and Miles chase each other around the backyard with the boundless energy of 6-year-olds who'd discovered the joy of mud puddles after a spring rain. 2 years. 2 years since the Christmas that changed everything. Since the night he'd walked back into David's house and discovered he was a father. 2 years since he'd chosen family over empire and learned the difference between wealth and richness. "They're going to need baths before dinner," Avery said, appearing beside him at the sink. Her hair was shorter now, sun-streaked from hours spent in the garden she'd cultivated behind the house. Paint smudges on her hands matched the ones decorating her old college sweatshirt, evidence of the afternoon art project that had consumed the entire family. "They're going to need new clothes first," Lucas replied, watching Miles slide across a particularly impressive mud slick. "I think that's the 3rd shirt this week." "4th, Avery corrected, bumping his shoulder with hers. "But who's counting?" Lucas smiled, wrapping an arm around his wife's waist. Wife. The word still sent a warm shock through his system, even 6 months after their quiet wedding ceremony in the garden they'd planted together. No photographers, no headlines, no business associates, just family, friends, and 2 little boys who'd served as ring bearers and flower boys simultaneously, creating beautiful chaos that perfectly captured their new life. The farmhouse had been Avery's idea. "If we're going to start over," she'd said 18 months ago, "let's really start over. Somewhere the boys can grow up without worrying about cameras or strangers knowing their names." Lucas had sold his Manhattan penthouse without a second thought, using the money to buy 40 acres in upstate New York, where their nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away and privacy wasn't a luxury. It was simply life. Everhart Infrastructure still existed, though Lucas had restructured it completely. He now worked 3 days a week from a home office he'd built in the converted barn, focusing only on projects that aligned with his values and left him free to attend soccer games, school plays, and the countless other events that made up the rhythm of family life. The company was smaller but more profitable, more ethical, and infinitely more meaningful than the empire he'd once built. The mysterious message from 2 years ago, "Some people don't stay buried," had turned out to be an empty threat from one of Blackstone's former associates, a man who'd been arrested 3 months later for attempting to blackmail other executives. The real danger had ended with Blackstone's conviction and 25-year prison sentence. Sometimes Lucas still woke in the middle of the night, checking the security system and listening for sounds that didn't belong. But most nights he slept peacefully, lulled by the quiet sounds of a house where people who loved each other were safe. "Daddy, come see," Miles called from the yard, waving something in his muddy hand. "I found a really cool rock. A really cool, muddy rock," Ethan corrected with the precision that had made him the unofficial fact-checker of first grade. "But it might be a fossil. We should clean it and investigate." Lucas exchanged a look with Avery, one of those wordless conversations that married couples perfected over time. She nodded toward the boys and he headed outside, leaving wet footprints on the kitchen floor he'd installed himself last fall. "Show me this geological discovery," Lucas said solemnly, crouching down to examine Miles's treasure. What followed was a 15-minute discussion about sedimentary rocks, dinosaur fossils, and the possibility that their backyard had once been an ancient seabed. Lucas found himself genuinely fascinated by his son's questions, their ability to find wonder in a muddy stone, their assumption that their father would always have time to explore whatever had captured their imagination. This was what he'd missed during those first 5 years. Not just the milestones, first words, first steps, first days of school, but the daily magic of watching two human beings discover the world. The way Ethan approached every problem like a scientific puzzle to be solved. The way Miles threw himself into every experience with complete joy and confidence. The way they both looked at him not as Lucas Everhart, former billionaire, but simply as Daddy, the man who built tree houses and told bedtime stories and could always be counted on to take their discoveries seriously. "Are you coming in for dinner?" Avery called from the back door. "Or are you three planning to eat mud soup?" "Can we eat mud soup?" Miles asked hopefully. "Absolutely not," Lucas replied. "But we can clean up this fossil and add it to your collection after we eat real soup." "Adum." The boys raced toward the house, their argument about whether the rock was a fossil or just a rock continuing at top volume. Lucas followed more slowly, taking a moment to look back at the garden they'd planted, the swing set he'd built, the life they'd created from nothing but love and determination. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from David. "How's the family paradise? Boys still driving you crazy?" Lucas typed back quickly. "Every day. It's perfect." Inside, the house buzzed with the controlled chaos of dinner time. Ethan was explaining the rock formation process to his mother while carefully washing his hands. Miles was attempting to convince everyone that dinosaurs probably ate vegetables, so why couldn't he skip the broccoli? Avery orchestrated it all with the patient skills she'd developed during those years of single parenthood, though now she had a partner who genuinely wanted to share every aspect of raising their children. As they sat around the kitchen table, a farmhouse table Lucas had spent 3 weeks building until he got it exactly right, he watched his family and marveled at how completely his definition of success had changed. 2 years ago, success meant net worth and market share, and the respect of people whose names appeared in business magazines. Now it meant Miles asking him to read just one more story before bed. It meant Ethan proudly showing him a perfect spelling test. It meant Avery falling asleep against his shoulder while they watched terrible movies after the boys were asleep. It meant knowing that when he woke up tomorrow, the most important parts of his life would still be there. "Daddy," Miles said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. "Are you happy?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Lucas felt his throat tighten. "Very happy," he said. "Are you?" "Very, very happy," Miles confirmed. "Ethan, are you happy?" "I'm happy," Ethan said seriously. "But I think our rock really is a fossil, and I'm not happy that you don't believe me." "I believe you," Miles said generously. "We can both be right." "That's not how facts work," Ethan protested. "Boys," Avery intervened gently. "There's room in this family for different opinions about rocks." Lucas watched this exchange, so normal, so beautifully ordinary, and realized that everything he'd lost 2 years ago had led him to everything he'd gained. The empire, the reputation, the carefully constructed life built around acquisition and achievement. Losing it all had been the best thing that ever happened to him. After dinner, after baths, after stories and songs and the elaborate bedtime routine that somehow always took twice as long as planned, Lucas and Avery sat on the front porch swing he'd installed last summer. The boys were finally asleep. The house was quiet, and the stars were visible in a way they never could be in Manhattan. "Do you miss it?" Avery asked quietly. "Any of it?" It was a question she'd asked before, usually on nights like this when the peace felt almost too good to be real. "I miss feeling important," Lucas admitted. "I miss the rush of closing impossible deals and solving complicated problems. I miss being respected by people who matter in ways that get measured in magazines." Avery nodded, understanding without judgment. "But," Lucas continued, "I don't miss being alone. I don't miss the constant pressure to prove myself. I don't miss lying awake wondering if anything I'd built actually mattered to anyone besides me." He turned to look at her. "And I definitely don't miss not knowing that I had two incredible sons and a wife who was strong enough to raise them without me, even when they're arguing about rocks for 45 minutes straight." "Especially then," Lucas said, pulling her closer. "Though I'm starting to think Ethan might actually be right about the fossil." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of a world that moved at a different pace than the one Lucas had inhabited for most of his adult life. In the distance, an owl called to its mate. The wind chimes Avery had hung from the maple tree created soft music that mixed with the rustle of leaves and the far-off sound of a train carrying people to places where they might or might not find what they were looking for. "Lucas?" Avery said after a while. "What?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For coming back. For choosing us. For becoming the father they deserved, and the man I always hoped you could be." Lucas felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the overwhelming gratitude that hit him sometimes when he fully understood how close he'd come to missing all of this. "Thank you for waiting," he replied. "For building a life beautiful enough that I wanted to be part of it. For raising our sons to be kind and curious and brave enough to accept a stranger as their father." "You were never a stranger," Avery said softly. "You were just lost for a while." As they sat together on the porch of the house they'd made into a home, watching the stars appear one by one in the endless sky, Lucas thought about the question Miles had asked at dinner. "Are you happy?" The answer was yes, but it was more complicated than that simple word could capture. He was grateful. He was amazed. He was humbled by the second chance he'd never deserved, and somehow received anyway. He was in love with a woman who'd proven that forgiveness was possible, and with two children who'd taught him that the most important inheritance he could leave them wasn't money. It was the memory of being unconditionally loved. Most of all, he was home. Really, truly home in a way that had nothing to do with addresses and everything to do with belonging somewhere, to someone, for reasons that couldn't be bought or sold or stolen by people who mistook wealth for worth. The house settled around them with the comfortable sounds of a place where people who loved each other were safe. And Lucas Everhart, former billionaire, current father, smiled into the darkness and wondered if anyone could truly understand the worth of a life well lived until they'd experienced the joy of almost losing everything that actually mattered. Would you have made the same choice? Given up an empire for love? Traded power for presence? Chosen family over fortune? Sometimes the greatest success isn't measured in what we gain, but in what we're brave enough to lose for something better. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.